What are some of the key differences when you take that CEO title on, and like things that you like, things that you're like, shit, I wish I would have known that that was going to be part of the job because I didn't sign up for that shit.
One of the hardest things about the CEO position is doing all the things that have to be done at the same time. There's plenty of times that things that CEOs do aren't that hard, but being on top of all of them all the time is really, really hard.
How are you balancing the need for growth, which is necessary, with marketing profitability and company profitability?
I think the simplest way to look at it is each incremental dollar something that makes the company better.
Welcome to Growth Talks, where we dive deep into the world of growth and marketing with industry leaders. I'm Krystina Rubino, the General Manager of Offline at Right Side Up. Today, we're chatting with Mike Lackman, who's currently a board member, advisor, and investor at various e-commerce brands, including Thriftly and Health Ecommerce. And he's also the former CEO of Trade Coffee and PetFlow. Mike and his team built Trade Coffee from zero to nearly $50 million in annual recurring revenue and profitability in just 5 years. Before his time at Trade Coffee, Mike served as COO, president, and CEO at PetFlow.com. Following an acquisition by Phillips Pet Food and Supply, Mike served as CMO, managing $1 billion in annual revenue and launching a successful new e-commerce division. In this episode, we're discussing Mike's experience balancing different C-suite executive roles, how to become an effective leader, and strategies and trends in the e-commerce industry. So let's get started. Mike, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to have you on this episode so you could share all of your knowledge.
Happy to be here.
Sweet. We'll get straight into it. So during your career, you've held a bunch of different C titles, COO, CMO, CEO roles at various companies across industry and stage. What led you to take on those various opportunities? And what's it like transitioning between those different roles?
I wish I could say it was more intentional than it was, but it wasn't. The first real senior leadership role I had was at PetFlow, and that's a business that I joined in 2012. And that was a classic case of you're one of the first really senior hires made in a company. So the founders had gotten some people together. They just raised some institutional capital. And I think it centers back to the whole conversation, which is it's very much about filling voids. Like ideally, when you're bringing on a really senior leader, and it obviously varies a lot by stage of the business, but for rapidly growing businesses, you pull the trigger on somebody who costs a lot of money and needs to make a huge impact in a place where you have a really big need. And so in that case, it was founders were really awesome at traffic acquisition and didn't really understand the core infrastructure of delivering on a retail value proposition. And so my background was in operations and merchandising and finance. And so in that case, COO made a lot of sense because they were going to manage overarching company strategy, capitalization, fundraising, and marketing. And I kind of had to do most of the rest of the stuff. And so I think that filling the void is kind of the reason that you end up in one position or the other. And then the jump to CEO was not one that was supernatural in the sense that when I came in, no one said, well, this person's also going to be the CEO of the business. At PetFlow, we actually split the business in two. When we started, we used social media, and this was pre-Facebook IPO. So this was when people were running tests and saying that Facebook ads got fewer clicks than people with blindfolds randomly clicking around the screen. They didn't make any money on mobile, believe it or not, when they IPO'd the business, if you remember that. And so we had this massive following on Facebook, and it didn't really make us any money because you poked people and saw pictures of dogs and birthdays. It wasn't like a very valid commercial product. And then all of a sudden, we actually became a top 100 Comscore property overnight because we had links to our blog becoming 15% of people's Facebook feed. And so the founders tried to create a product called Little Things. And you can read a lot of Joe Spizer's stuff about this. And I think it was Fast Company that he wrote about this recently, about his story of trying to create a Facebook-driven media property. And I actually ended up orchestrating a management buyout for the commerce business. And that was how I ended up in a CEO role, was we actually bought the business out so that the VCs and the founders could go on and do the media stuff. And then we stuck with the commerce business and rebuilt it, got it profitable, et cetera. And so I think that was the evolution there. And then when I became a CMO, it was because when we sold PetFlow, it was to our biggest supplier. And that business, A, didn't have a CMO at the time. And B, the point of buying our business, which was really good at web merchandising and web and direct-to-consumer fulfillment, that was something they wanted to put at the center of their offering to their customers. And so I came in and really we took the assets of PetFlow and turned that into a set of capabilities for small brick and mortar retailers. That was at the center of our go-to-market proposition with a lot of our customers. And so the CMO suite was like the right place to put it. But I can think of a ton of companies where I'd be a really lousy CMO. In that case, that was a really good fit. And so I think it is just kind of dependent on the situation, is the long story long on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. And there's always those things where it's like, well, in order to be an effective CXO, there are basic foundational qualities in leadership that you just kind of have to have. As you were talking, it kind of made me think of the T-shaped marketer construct that everybody has, where it's like, there's a deep part of your T and then there's breadth, right? There's breadth and depth. Is it like there's like a T-shaped executive thing kind of in there? Like you've got your areas of depth, but after a certain point, does breadth become more important than depth when you're thinking about leadership level roles?
I actually hadn't heard the T-shaped thing before. The way I heard it described was like snorkeling and holding your breath. Like you can sort of paddle around everywhere, but then there's a few places you can hold your breath and go deep. But T-shaped is a lot simpler. No, I think it really depends on the situation. The piece where I know from having done it poorly and then from having learned to do it better, that really, if you're going to talk about C-level role, and let's rule out the cases where it's a title and you're the chief executive of yourself and no one reports to you kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're the founder, co-founder, head of marketing, head of all of the things, and then some. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So aside from being sort of a factotum or sort of a big title sort of a thing, I think the difference is, at least at my most immature, there were times where I approached it as, I'm going to do most of the work and also take on the most overhead in terms of how much responsibility I have. And so that's why it's there. And it's not that you don't very often have to do those things, but I think when you do that job well, it's your ability to both get your stuff done day to day, but then really consistently prosecute a 3, 4, 5 year vision, or in some cases, it could be as simple as 3 or 4 quarters or 3 or 4 months. Here's what success looks like. Here's how far away it is. Here's how it's going to happen. And it's not an either or. You have to get today's work done. You have to manage you have to write performance reviews, close the books, whatever those everyday things are. But there's definitely been times where you've let those things get in the way of setting those bigger visions. The number one most important thing about a senior role, regardless of the title, is the ability to create and like I said, prosecute that vision and turn that into reality. And there's never a case where you're not empowered to do that. I mean, the number one reason I hear people say to me why they aren't approaching the job that way is, well, that's not my purview, or it's really this person's. Like, everyone has it in them to set those ambitions and make those work as part of the job. I've never heard of somebody saying that one of their subordinates was way out of line for saying, I'd like to be here in 3 years. Like, I've just never once sat back and heard that conversation, but I've heard a lot of, I can't set those directions because it's not in my title or something along those lines.
The classic, that's not my job.
I wouldn't hold it against someone for not feeling empowered. And I certainly don't think you should walk into your boss's office and say, let me tell you how this is going to work. But I do think saying, I think in 3 years we could be here, and the right thing for us to do is A, B, and C for us to get there. It sounds pretty simple, but it's really, really hard to do that. And I think the consistency with which you can hold that vision up and say, yes, I still believe in this. The way I put it is like, you need to create a vision that has like tattoo confidence. Pretty darn permanent. Now, you get a tattoo you don't like, you can change it. It's painful. You have to get more tattoos on top of it to make it look different, or you have to get lasers to get it taken off. So it's a real commitment. And you know what? If something comes up where it's the wrong thing to have, I don't have one, but if I had the like Anthony Kiedis tribal armband, maybe at some point I'd say, I don't want this anymore. And maybe that's the right thing, is it's time to get rid of that thing. It's really painful. And so I think you have to create a vision that's important enough to really be success, and painful enough that if you have to change it, it's a real thing. But at the same time, every day you're looking at it, and today might be the day that you have to part with it and say, we have to change the vision. That's the part that I think is either on or it's off. And when it's missing, that's one of the number one reasons people change leadership.
It's interesting because you have a strong marketing background that you take to all of these different roles. I do think, to your point about tattoo-like permanence, or even just thinking about the way that you view marketing or the way you practice marketing needing to ever evolve, right? Like, that was a great reminder of Facebook. Like, one of my claims to fame is that early on, I was working in paid social around that same time, and I helped this company, Fortune 100 company, create what was then the largest community of equine enthusiasts. I don't know if it actually made them money. Nobody did, but like, nobody else was doing it. And it was like, this is great. And it's like, that was important back then. Yeah. That is not important now. There are different ways to harness and utilize that. So, long way of asking, like, has your perspective on marketing changed in each role? And how have you thought about the priority of marketing within the broader context of the business, or maybe even just over time, how that's changed?
So because I didn't come from marketing, I started out in ops. Like my very first jobs out of school were running warehouses and call centers and a lot of math
Yeah, you
stuff.
kind of came, yeah.
I basically got into marketing because it got really mathy and I was good at mathy stuff and growth was really important. And I just started taking it on. And so I do think in some ways, because of how expensive and challenging it was all along, I went from kind of getting good enough at it to manage it, but begrudgingly so, to really learning to put it at the center of what I was doing. Because growth is the number one determiner of enterprise value. Now, growth in profitable unit economics, which the second part's been forgotten a lot by a lot of businesses, is really critical.
Oh, we're getting a real good reminder of it in the last few years, I think.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, this is one of those things, I know this from folks that I know in my own life who've worked in asset management businesses where they have to invest other people's money for a living. It's really easy to throw rotten tomatoes at people who made a bad investment. You can't just sit on your hands and pass on stuff all day long. If you're in the investment management business, you have to put money to work. And sometimes that means you end up doing something that you don't love in retrospect. Similarly, you have to grow. And it is really humbling that there's times where it's easy to look backwards at some decisions that you made and say that those things didn't work out. But I've also made the other mistake where you try to play it too safe. And at the end of the day, if you don't grow at all, it is a 100% guarantee that you're not creating enterprise value. So you got to create value by growing. So number one is grow. And I think it took me longer to learn that than it should have. But I think the lesson there too, I've never aspired to or put energy into playing golf, but someone made me read a book about it once. And the thing in this book that always stuck with me was they talk about the difference between a pro and an amateur. And what they said was that the amateur spends their whole day being annoyed by the things that make the course hard, having to carry it over the water, having to shape it around the tree, having to get it around the sand trap. And a pro recognizes that without those things, it would just be a football field. It'd be really boring. And once you get good at it, you learn to enjoy the things that are hard because, like shaping that one from right to left is actually kind of what makes this interesting and fun. Like that's the minutia or the hard parts are the point of it. I think the coming to understand, and I'm particularly fond of this framework of they call red marketing, which is relevance, ease, and distinctiveness. Like really trying to understand with anything you're doing, what can you do starting with the customer problem that you're solving to say, how can I find a way to reach these people in a way that's really functionally and culturally relevant? How can I make it really, really easy for them to give me their money or use the service? And then finally, how can I do both of those things distinctively? Stand on a corner that no one else does, do so in a way that's really unique and distinctive. And I think if you can always be asking yourself like where you are versus where you should be across all three of those dimensions, you're building a really solid product. And I think if you look at it that way, all the other operational, financial, mathematical stuff can roll under that. That stuff is both in some ways really simple, but other ways really, really hard.
I barely understand anything about golf, but I'm like, no, that makes sense to me. Because it's like, if it were that easy to solve this job, first of all, none of us would be making good money doing it. And I don't think that those of us who are fulfilled by doing the difficult things would be interested in it. Like it wouldn't hold my interest. You know what I mean? Like if it was that freaking easy, I'd be like, all right, well, I guess on to the next thing. And I mean, kind of similar to that, I do think there's a fundamental difference in C titles aside from CEO. When you're the CEO, I have to imagine, I haven't yet been in that position. I might be someday. As like the general manager of a business, I have to imagine that it's something similar where it's just like, well, there's nobody else but you at the end of the day to answer those questions or to chart that direction. And so like, I guess what I'm getting at is what are some of the key differences when you take that CEO title on and like things that you like, things that you're like, shit, I wish I would have known that was going to be part of the job because I didn't sign up for that shit.
Yeah, I think, and again, it really depends on the role. One of the hardest things about the CEO position is doing all the things that have to be done at the same time. There's plenty of times that things that CEOs do aren't that hard, but being on top of all of them all the time is really, really hard. And so I do think CEOs very often, their number one job is growth because the number one driver of value is growth. And so all you're thinking about is growth. Now you're working with whoever the other leaders in your team are that are driving growth, but it's still a huge growth job for the most part. But at the same time, there's just a lot of buck stops here that you have to deal with. We always did employee NPS on a really regular basis. And one of the hardest things for me to read and feedback was that people felt disconnected from what was going on or like didn't feel like they had input on why decisions were being made, that sort of a thing. And the number one way I found to remedy that wasn't by kind of symptomatically fighting it as it came up, but it was to find a mechanism for really overt over communication of, okay, so what information do people need to feel connected to what's going on? Are you providing that or not? And what's the best tool to get that in front of people? And at least in my last business, one of the things I'm most proud of, and that I really did enjoy doing, but it was a huge part of my job, was we did this really critical Friday all hands email using the Axios software. The media company has the SaaS platform for internal comms. And it was 10 really concise bite-sized nuggets about what's happening with the company strategy, what's the most important thing that has to happen this week, different parts of the business, directly surfacing some things in the words of our customers, interactions that our customers had with the company that we thought needed to be spotlit, stuff in the coffee business, stuff with our roasters or suppliers, and then some elements about company culture. We got a 90 to 95% read rate on those emails. And when people started reading those consistently, and by the way, when you kept that effort up where 52 times a year, people read something really coherent that really mattered, there was some repetition to it. But at the end of that, we stopped seeing, people had plenty of other concerns or complaints about the company, but we saw the concern of, I felt disconnected, disappear. And I do think earning that connection or buy-in to your vision, in addition to just setting the vision, is absolutely important part of that. And the final bit that's really critical, I do think every leadership role has this, but just my experience, the CEO has it a lot more so, is everybody loves the idea of being data-driven, but your job as a CEO is to get as much data as you can so that you can make decisions at the pace at which decisions need to be made. It's not a job to make decisions once you have enough data to make decisions. And so you just have to be in a position where you're being decisive and you're making decisions quickly. And again, there's been times I've absolutely failed at that as the number one thing I did poorly. And I think if you go into it saying my job is to make decisions well, that's a really important part of the job. And it's just the weight of that to me has felt more so at the CEO position than other parts of the org.
I appreciate that because you're never going to nail every decision. Even if you have all of the information in the world, even if you wait until you get that last bit of that read from that test or that last piece of what you think is critical information, perfect is the enemy of good sometimes. I think it's probably good to hear. I mean, it's even good for me to hear that failure is always an option. It's not the one that you choose, but it happens and it's going to happen. Growth marketing and high growth tech period is inherently a fast moving discipline. It is the fastest moving part of the marketing discipline. And there's that old, the Facebook axiom, move fast and break shit. But there's something real to it. I'm sure you could think of times where it's if we would have waited to make that decision, even though it was imperfect, if we would have just sat there and stayed static, bad shit would have went down.
Well, it is one of those things where, at least if you want to talk about growth businesses, and I've seen this both having been there myself and then having counseled some of these businesses in the last few years, you learn about this when it gets real. I've been weeks away from missing payroll a couple times. I've been helping folks who have been in the same situation. And it's amazing how fast you can start making decisions when those constraints happen. And I do think that that's why some overcapitalized businesses get into trouble. It's a little bit you just have to jump without the rope. At the end of the day, if you have the safety rope on, the jump's not going to be the same. You have to find a way to put yourself in those situations where, or to simulate the kind of decision making that you feel when you've been in those, you have the muscle memory from having done it. But there's a million things you'll convince yourself that you need more time to deliberate on. And there's also been times where you realize just how fast you can make decisions. Now, I do think you have to train an organization to do that with you. And the last thing you ever want to be in is an organization where everyone's kind of waiting for you to point at stuff. Because I found myself in that situation as well. And that is a recipe for the Dwight Schrute emergency org chart where it's just 80 black lines all into Dwight. You don't want to be there. But I think the idea is, are you at the table for the right decisions? And are you making those decisions at the pace that has to happen with the quality that you want? But I wouldn't agree with you necessarily that failure is always an option, because I think it depends on the kind of failure. If the thing is too big, you shouldn't fail at it. Don't mess up the big stuff. That's a really, there's plenty of decisions you have to make where failure is actually kind of not an option. If you fail at those things, it's your ass. And that's just the reality situation.
Yeah.
And I can think of a bunch of places where that's true. But I also think there's a point where you don't want to tolerate failure in execution either. It's hard enough to make good decisions and put energy toward things. The worst is when, because of variance in execution, you really don't know why it failed. You tried something and now you probably have to try it again because the way you did it wasn't high quality enough for you to know if it was the right thing to do. You fall into that trap, a few times in a row. And that's really, really nasty. And so I think it's not to say that you need perfection, but you need high enough execution that you're going to come away with a really strong binary outcome.
Yeah, it's not the desired outcome. But I do think that when you create organizations where people are afraid to fail and they're just waiting and in that mode of like, well, if I F up, like it's my job on the line if I make the smallest mistake. That kind of culture is where I'm like, no, like if you're trying to do something that nobody's ever done before, you're not perfect. It's okay to not nail it and get an A++ every time. An A- sometimes is okay if it gets you there. You know what I mean? Like, no, it's not the desired outcome, but like, I don't think anybody really wants people walking around like scared shitless to make a move in any direction. But there is on the other end of it, it's like, that's why it's so important to hire really, really well. Like first of all, Any's White True reference, it's still my Slack icon. Like in general, like I love The Office so much, but like, I do think there's something so beautiful in that when it starts to just look like one giant ladder up to the top and he pulls that clear one over the org chart and you're like, I'll do it all. And that's not going to move anybody forward. You need to empower people to make decisions and like get out of their way too.
Well, and that's kind of why I use the term binary. My point isn't just make everything awesome. I remember a good friend of mine coming out of school worked in wealth management in China, and a lot of her first wave of clients would sit across the table from her and say, like, I want 15 to 20% returns, but if you lose $1 of my money, I'm going to kill you. It was like, oh my God, cool. Great. I want insane risk returns and you can't lose anything. Awesome. So my point is more, you need binary outcomes. It needs to be good enough that you know whether the decision you made is one you should stick with or change. What you shouldn't do is try a thing and go, yeah, but we did it so crappy. We don't really know whether it was a good idea or not.
Oh, yeah. No, that's just the most infuriating waste of time and money.
But that is where move fast and break things is tough. And I think on the one hand, you don't want to have a culture of fear where people play it safe. At the same time, there needs to be a little bit of, and fear is probably the wrong word, but there needs to be some pressure.
Consequences? That's a strong word too.
The line between I'm going to do just enough to get this task off my plate and get it on to the next one, and let's really figure out what the customer needs and can we put something great in front of them. You can skinny it down as much as you want so you can get learnings fast. That's great. Mm-hmm. But the times where you put in that little bit of extra energy so that the shot you took makes a lot of sense. I mean, think about how much energy goes into a really good A/B test. You can't test that stuff infinitely. And so the teams that put that little bit of extra, whether it's time, energy, inspiration, whatever kind of input matters in the moment, if they put those extra 2% in every time, when that compounds over 26 2-week sprints a year, it's a massive difference between the team that does that and the team that doesn't. And so I think if you feel that pressure of we need to move fast, and whether that's runway or opportunity cost or any of those things, a bit of that pressure is actually really important in terms of inspiring the right kind of judgment so that you can get the high quality stuff done, where at least I've felt it before. And it's really hard with remote teams or distributed teams. If you don't have that kind of outcome ownership, doing just enough to say you did the thing and then say, we'll learn from it is just, if you circle the drain on that a little bit, it's really toxic.
Today's environment, like there's been this shift for years. It was like growth at all costs. That's what investors wanted to see. That's what executive teams wanted to see. Like everybody's incentives were aligned towards a growth at all cost mentality. And now there's been this shift from growth at all costs to profitability. But you don't always need to choose one or the other. And PetFlow is an example. And there have been other companies where you helped turn a business around to profitability while still growing. And I think this is a question that everybody who's in any kind of a leadership role in any kind of business is asking themselves. How are you balancing the need for growth, which is necessary, with marketing profitability and company profitability?
I think the simplest way to look at it is each incremental dollar something that makes the company better. And so the best articulation of this, if you read it, if you go all the way back to when Wayfair went public, that was a really tough thing even in that environment. I think this was 2014, 2015. It's a great S1 to read if you want to read one. And their CEO, Neeraj Shah, is a really brilliant guy. But at the time, it was retailers should make money. So why are you okay with this business burning cash? And what Neeraj taught the people who were going to buy shares of Wayfair was, yes, because we're growing. But every dollar we spend growing, every little bit of burn that we have is in service of making the company better. And I can show you how each one of those new customer cohorts we acquire is really rock solid and a great investment. And so I don't think we'd be better off if we did less of that growth and stuck some more money in the proverbial a mattress or cut a dividend to the shareholders. And then you really saw that play out with Amazon and with Chewy and with some other businesses that, like, I remember when Chewy was coming up, PetSmart was issuing dividends to their shareholders and Chewy was acquiring more cohorts. Like, which one was actually creating more value? I think that's where you start with the crucible of marginality. And especially for a growing business, I was working with another investor in a business that I'm working on right now where their big metric is speed to double CAC. Like, if you're starting out a business and you want to grow it, can you be in a place where, based on either the economics that you already have or the pro forma economics that you know you can get to with scale, can you be getting a 2x return on the cost you acquire a customer in 9 months, 12 months? And if you're doing that, that's really great. Now, it may be that you need to go through a time period where, like, I remember we couldn't get a single meeting at trade with the USPS until we shipped 1 million packages. And so our shipping economics were terrible for the first 1 million shipments that we made to our customers until we finally got that. So there were some points where we burned money there in order to build the scale so that we could bring a really competitive offering in our unit economics. And we spent some time looking at our pro forma for how we justified some of those ad spend dollars. But I think anything, it's like the old line between art and pornography, like how much burns okay because of this or that. It's like, I couldn't tell you where the line is, but I know it when I see it. And in a lot of cases, especially if you promise consistent top line growth and there's this kind of mental math assumption that the bottom line follows along those lines, that's really messy. Or even more so, if you're making LTV assumptions, but the kind of customers you're acquiring changes materially. Like, it's a 3-year LTV projection. If you have 12 quarters over a 3-year run, the difference between quarter one's customers and quarter eight's customers is night and day, but you're still using that quarter one LTV assumption. Like, that's where I think you see a lot of that stuff getting tripped up. And then, like anything, the pendulums swing. And so now it's swinging back toward, I won't take your word for it, make money and grow slower, which is probably fine. But at the end of the day, it's just, you got to capitalize your business around how you can grow. And that needs to be rooted in the core behavioral economics of your customers and the way you acquire them. Speed to double CAC is actually a really, really good one. I like that a lot.
I mean, you always hear about CAC to LTV ratio and different thresholds for setting it, but speed to double CAC is not one that I've heard used a ton. I like that because I think there's always this tension between like short-term marketing wins and sustainable long-term business growth. And budget allocation between marketing and operations and other departments, and the point that you make about 1 million shipments and needing that to be a prereq for kind of like meaningful movement in profitability and COGS and all of that. How do you manage the tension between short-term wins, marketing wins or otherwise, and what's going to help your business grow? Because we've all been in situations where we have to manage the expectations of a board along all of those lines on that spectrum at the same time.
Well, I think that's where, back to the original point we were making about the point of these different roles within these organizations, the clearer you are about what the future state is and how you can connect the current state to that through what you're going to do, the easier it is to make these decisions. The more you let yourself say, I don't know where we're going, but I'm just going to survive. And I've done this many times, and you learn from doing it wrong. There's times where you really do think, this is so crazy that I'm going to be either smart or hardworking enough to just take these weird pieces and put them together into something that'll make it through the next quarter, and then we'll do it again. And when things are really tough, sometimes that's your natural instinct. And it's kind of dumb to do it that way. My mom likes to say, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. You start doing that, you can get into that habit. And in some ways, from a business perspective, as dumb as the analogy sounds, which is like, it's kind of MacGyver strategy, which is the right way to defuse a bomb would probably be to get a bunch of really fancy tools and all that. But no, he's got paper clip and a rubber band and a piece of gum or something like that. And he finds a way to do it. Obviously using the most current analogies here, Krystina, because all the kids are watching MacGyver these days.
I mean, it's required viewing for the people that have been born in 1999, which by the way is 25 years ago, but no, continue.
I think MacGyver was dated in 1999. So it's, by the end of the episode, we'll be talking about Matlock. No, I think in some ways, again, there's simple, complicated, and there's hard, easy. And I think some of what you're describing is a bit of a simple hard. If you know what success looks like, you know how much money you have in the bank, and you know where you want to be, a certain amount has to go to growth and a certain amount has to go to other stuff. And if the way you make those trade-offs is, hey, it's a zero-sum game and this is the best way we can apportion these things around, at least everybody understands what it's in service of. I would never even want to have the fact that there's reporting to a board in the conversation. It doesn't matter. If you're making those trade-off decisions because it's what the board wants, like that's kind of a yes. I think all that matters is that it's in service of a bigger strategy. And the times where I've gotten wrapped around the axle on what you're describing, I think the culpability lies back to me or somebody else in the organization not creating a clear picture of success. And one of the reasons that I remember I took over as a CEO of a startup that was very young, and it needed a lot of decisions made, and I'd only been there for a week. Sometimes you're in these rescue situations where it's really tough, but you have to make decisions. It's almost like if the wheels are rolling in the car, you can't choose not to steer the wheel. Every decision you make, even nothing, is a decision. I think that's where it comes in. And in some ways, again, it's hard, but it's actually kind of simple. If you deprive marketing costs at all costs, you'll have one or two decent months when you have the tail from last month's marketing. You'll make more money, then you know you'll be hosed. And I've made the decision before because I literally had to. And there's other times where you do it impulsively. I think that actually gets kind of simple, but it's really hard to pull the trigger on the right thing that has to happen.
That for me is one of the things that separates good leaders from mediocre leaders is like, you have to be willing to make those decisions when they need to be made. Remember when I went in-house, the first and only time in my career that I was in-house full-time, et cetera, I made a decision to cut radio advertising my second week. And the founder of the company I was at was like a longtime radio marketer. And it was an uncomfortable conversation, but I was just like, we don't know how much money this is making us.
Yeah, right.
And I have an inkling that it's not making us enough money. And it's like, are there times where it's just like the sum total of your experiences? I'm sure you ever hear the Citibank logo story, how the Citi logo got created? Really cool. Really freaking nerdy, but it was basically like a, big 3 martini advertiser lunch, whatever. And this agency had been pulled in to do this big logo for Citibank. And there was a creative director there, art director, and she listened and heard the whole thing. And she literally sketched out on a napkin CITI with the little umbrella. And she's like, here's your logo. And then they like had to fight to get paid for the work. But it's like, well, you're not just paying for the 50 minutes that this person sat there and listened to the challenge and came up with the idea. It's like that person has 25 years of experience, and that's what you're paying for.
Yeah, I mean, the way I've heard that described too is like you're not paying for the swinging of the hammer, you're paying for knowing where to tap. And I think that's where it all takes one tap to get the machine going. It's still worth the value of the machines running. I've heard it said before that organizational health is really principally a function of confidence. And with all the talk about ego, I think what you're saying gets at the real difference between ego and confidence. So if you think about, I think you need massive confidence to do any of these things. In fact, the number one reason that you see some bad decisions made or some poor kind of blame this person, don't have this thing clear, whatever, is very often from a lack of confidence. So extremely high confidence is great, even if it's slightly irrational. The challenge is more, it can't be about yourself. And so I remember because I just talk too much, someone saying to me, you need to think about the difference between talking to satisfy your desire to talk and talking to communicate what needs to be said. You should only say the things that are necessary to inform the people you're talking to. Anytime you're talking to satisfy your own compulsion to talk, you should just stop immediately mid-sentence. And similarly, sometimes we make these decisions you're talking about to satisfy a very rational human desire to throw a blanket on the fire of a thing that inspires a lot of fear or shame or regret or any of the, again, take it from me. You find some massive variance in your numbers, or you find out you're getting sued by whoever for whatever practice. And it's just, God, I would give anything to just turn off that blinking red light and make it go away. And your human desire is to just put that fire out as fast as you can. I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. Great, turn everything off. If you're doing that for the right reasons, it's great. If you can ask yourself with real honesty, is it satisfying the kind of, you almost want to call it emotional need to throw a blanket on that fire so that sense of shame or risk or fear goes away? Probably a bad decision. And again, I say that having made very many on those grounds.
Yeah. I mean, when you know better, you do better too. Like there's an element of that, like speaking so eloquently about that, even if you hadn't said, I've done that before, I think it's very apparent. Like it's the difference between saying and doing, like you hear it in your voice.
Well, because what's real, and I was talking to a friend of mine in the neighborhood here who ran a public company for a long time and just retired. And what he said to me was, oh my God, it's been 2 weeks since I checked the numbers every morning. But for 20 years, every morning, first thing I did when I woke up was check yesterday's numbers. And it's just all you want to do is see those numbers get better. And I've been through 2-year stretches where you're trying to make it work and it's not. And it's just every time that report comes out, it's just, you're so invested in, can we get that needle to move just a little bit in the right direction? Can we get that going? And what you don't want to do is get those feelings of either desperation or concern or fear or any of those things
Yeah.
lead you to make decisions that kind of quiet those things versus still, even in the craziest situations, confidently saying, all that aside, we're doing this. I think Gladwell talks about it. Sorry for quoting Gladwell, but I think he was the one who talked about it in terms of the penalty kicks in soccer. It's like an impossible situation for a goalie to defend a penalty kick. Statistically, the smartest thing to do is stand in the middle. You take up the most space in the goal. Most of the shots go to the middle, but you look like a schmuck if you just stand there and watch it go by. If you dive 4 feet off the ground in the opposite direction, no one really blames you for it not blocking the shot, but it looks really cool. And it looks like you're trying really hard and you do this big athletic thing and you like soar through the air with your hands out. And it's kind of the dumbest way to try to block a shot because you're not going to guess which way it goes. And I think there's a little bit of that in it, that you have to have the fearlessness to, even if you haven't earned all the credibility from everybody in the boat, say, this is the best decision we can make, and then do what's necessary to earn the buy-in so people actually follow you to do it.
Yeah, I like that. I'll take a beat here for a second. We do a little game called the A/B test because marketers love an A/B test, along with acronyms. I mean, these are just some of our love languages, including spreadsheets.
Especially games with no heads up. I can't wait to see where this goes.
You'll be fine. You think on your feet.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you some questions. You're going to do 2 variables. You pick one. Super scientific, very data-driven. Some work-related, some funsies. I'll start. Subscription model versus one-time purchase.
One-time purchase. If you're asking me in any application, if you only have, if I'm only bringing a hammer or a screwdriver to the job site.
That's correct.
I'm bringing one-time purchase.
One-time purchase. Shopify or custom build?
Shopify.
Yeah. It's just, even as a consumer, I look for it. I'm like, oh, this is easy. Dogs or cats?
That's an easy one. Neither.
Wow. Fair enough.
My house has a 4-mammal limit at this point.
Okay, that's the background of it. I should ask that in relation to how many animals currently live in your house. Okay, city travel or nature travel?
Nature.
CMO or CEO?
CEO.
DIY or hiring a professional?
Professional. This is when you have to pick one. I actually do a fair amount of DIY, but there's also a lot of plenty of stuff in my house kind of sucks because of it. So I think professional.
Brand marketing or growth marketing?
Brand.
Why?
I don't know. Without one, the other doesn't work.
I agree with that. Yeah. I think we've spent a lot of time really focusing on the ins and outs of growth marketing to the detriment of overall brand platform and messaging. And then we try and use growth marketing to answer the questions that only brand marketing can answer. I think I agree with you.
If you want to go deeper on that one, I think the place where brand marketers get a bad rap is where they try to use brand to paper over missing product market fit. It doesn't work. So if you think about the market wants a thing, I'm going to solve their problem with these channels, and these positioning, and this pricing model. If that fit doesn't work, then the brand positioning isn't going to make it work. But back to that notion of relevant, easy, and distinctive, if you can get an accurate sense of the branding behind making it really socially relevant to the target customer you're going after and execute on that distinctively, then that's really important. And I think that those things, you could find any number of in-house or third-party growth marketers who can take those components and make that work. I think if you asked any growth marketer, if that foundation of product market fit and brand isn't there, you can needle away at funnel optimization or landing pages or turn the campaign on at 2:00 and turn it off at 2:30 and then do whatever kind of like Wizard of Ozzy kind of stuff you want to do. And it's not going to work. So I think that's where it comes from.
Okay, let me say. Oh, okay. I'll end on a fun one. Time travel to the future or to the past?
Pass.
When? You have to pick one. Like my husband's is always like the 70s when like bands were like amazing and like all that. But like, yeah, when?
Very, very late 19th century. Like you can get around. Yeah, like there's some medicine. Most places have laws.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you showed up in like ancient Greece and you didn't speak with the right accent or something, someone would probably just chop your head off or enslave you.
That's a good point. Okay, so we actually touched on something during our silly little dumb game that we do, but the notion of subscription versus one-time purchase. And it just seems like for a few years, like subscriptions were all the rage. And I think you're starting to see it die down a little bit. But having led quite a few different D2C consumer businesses, what trends are you seeing and predicting in the D2C and subscription space?
In some ways, the subscription good or bad thing is a little bit like the conversation about inflation. Prices are way up, but the rate of growth in prices is down. So the inflation rate at 3% versus 8%, inflation rate is down. Prices are still up where above where they used to be and are still getting higher every year. Subscriptions used to be really hard to execute on. Everything from the payments infrastructure to the user experience to all the, I mean, when we did that in 2012 at PetFlow, it was like atom splitting teams of engineers trying to just be like, what if you got the same bag every 4 weeks? It was months of work. The technology was really hard, which meant other than just magazines that mailed you something every month and you paid once a year and you were either on or off the magazine subscription, businesses did not have the capability to have this recurring background financial relationship with their customers, consumer or otherwise. And so I think the rate of growth in subscriptions is slowing in response to the market, but there's still way more subscriptions now on a per person, per subscription basis than was the case 5 years ago and 10 years before that. And so it's a little bit more like inflation's at 3%, but the prices are still higher than they used to be by a major factor and are still only going in one direction. And so I think when you then dig deeper into the reason for that, subscriptions work pretty well in level 1 and then like really well in level 2. So pretty well is when you have a consistent marriage of value creation for the customer and value capture from the customer. Mm-hmm. So again, magazine perfectly even functions over time. Like I pay for each magazine I get, and I get one magazine at a time and I read them once a month. And like those two functions are pretty well aligned. When you look then at where it gets misaligned, in a consumer setting, that could be I subscribe to the soap of the month or something, and then I've got 16 soaps in my shower I haven't used. I'm still paying for them every day. The value creation of one new bar of soap, like I'm trying to sell you something you would never want to buy, and I'm making you pay for it every time. As those get misaligned, it's really, really bad, and it drives churn. And so I think when you go then to level 2, the question is how good is churn for the people that are subscribing? And the reason subscriptions were so popular is because it starts with SaaS, where you have greater than 100% net revenue retention in good products. You sell software as a service to a company. So a business like ServiceNow, best example you can read about this in the current setting, they literally make their software the way that your departments work and do stuff. It's like the system of record for internal operations, which means that for growing companies, every new person who joins the company adds another seat that gets subscribed every month. And so as companies grow, it's not just reasonably good retention. It's that a company that contributed $1,500 to you across however many employees last month, 12 months later may be paying you $2,100 or then $2,800. And the marginal cost to serve them, other than the compute, which is a pretty small part of the total economics, basically stays the same. Mm-hmm. And that's why those businesses are valued at 9 to 16 times their revenues, is because the revenues on a per customer basis are growing so dramatically quickly that it's almost criminal not to lose money to acquire as many of those places as possible, especially when you look at the winner take all dynamics in those kind of businesses. Now, spinning that all the way back around, like we were always very conscious of that in coffee. I'll say that in my coffee business, I ran that with a complete maniacal fear of churn. I was more afraid of churn than anything because, as I said to the folks that hired me when I started that job, if we get on the wrong side of churn and then try to make up for it by bringing in new customers, I'd honestly just shut the doors and play ping pong until we run out of money. It's just like a better use of everybody's time because it only goes one place. Like you go out of business and you burn all the cash and everyone loses their job. Like it's not a company. And so I think that the change in subscription is you had a pretty tight window in time where people tried to apply a really awesome model, which was SaaS, to lots of different places. And those got applied in some good ways. And then they got over applied in other ways like Meal Kit. And I think that's where the harder you twist someone's arm to subscribe, the more you're going to see that fall out of the bottom of the bucket on the other side. And I think that's why when you asked subscription or one-time purchase, I think subscription's great in cases where it's really consistent and very level value delivery to the end user that the user feels.
Is that where you start to look and you look at CAC to LTV ratio and you see the drop off and you start to think that's where I need to adjust my product service offering? That's one of those situations where I need to kind of reverse course and say, okay, well, if you're going to capture this amount of the value in the first 6 months, then like the first 6 months needs to be X. We need to basically price it this time or this way. And it's one-time fee or a quarterly fee. And the first 2 quarters are however high they're going to be. Like, is that where you start to think about adjustments to the business model in response to LTV shifts and changes and trends over time?
You can, and again, I'm like an example of having learned things the hard way, but you also don't want to force a business model on the customer. think sometimes when you kind of spreadsheet manage, I mean, the worst thing you can do is sit down with the CFO and the CMO and be like, I'm just going to change come on, we can get this cell from that. You're telling me we can't get from 55 to 51? Come on, you can do that, right? Like, what if we just make it 51? It looks so much better. Let's say probably 51.
Yeah.
I think that's where the challenge becomes. If you try to boost LTV by introducing subscription, because that gets you a vault in LTV, it's just a much less sustainable way to grow the business. And it's going to come out the other side of either churn or cost of acquisition, because you either need to put lots of heavy promotion into it, or you're going to suffer tougher conversion rates because of subscriber apprehension on the front end.
I mean, that point about subscription and coupon and incentivization, I just remember there was a time period from 2016, 2017 through about 2022 where you could throw a rock and hit 10 different meal kit companies that were offering $80 off their first 4 kits. It just became kind of a race to the bottom in a way. Is that the kind of front end incentivization that you should try to avoid as a business?
Yeah. And I think that's where the market is pretty clear in what it tells you when you run a business. If someone says, I value your thing at $40, then the number of people who will pay $80 for said thing is probably about half of the size of the people who were willing to do it for 40. Now, maybe they would have paid 82, but if you trained them that it's worth 40, when you then say, once the deal's over, it's now 80, all you know is you have a group of people who say it's worth 40 because that's what they've actually done. And I do think this is more of a tactics thing, but you always want the consumer to feel valued and like they're getting something valuable for what they've done. And if the value is 100% in their rearview mirror, the path out is always more attractive than the path in. And so I think that's where big upfront balloon incentives can be really effective at conversion. But to my point, I don't know, what was it, 15, 20 minutes ago about quarter 1 versus quarter 8. Well, those quarter 1 cohorts came in with incentive program 1, and then quarter 8 cohorts came in with a much beefier upfront incentive. They're just going to perform very differently. And it takes months to see that really play out. Like I was talking to somebody today about Costco in this way, where Costco is not cheap. I don't think people who shop there actually spend less money on stuff, but they're really effective at making people feel smart about the places where they choose to spend discretionarily. They don't feel indulged. They feel smart in the way that they buy the things they want. And so I think similarly with subscription, you feel really smart when you're getting that upfront deal. You kind of by inverse feel like a schmuck when you're paying full price for it and there's no more benefit to you down the line. And I think that's where, to your question about the D2C model, where that's going, I do think one of the challenges with all this is that for better or worse, the world I came into as a marketer in 2012, 2014, 2016 there was just like old world billboards and cable television ad people who spent money on these crazy CPMs at big scale. And then there were these disruptive companies who kind of needled around the edges in these emerging, whether it was Criteo, like the first retargeting platforms, or DoubleClick before it was part of Google, or any of that kind of stuff. Like they were willing to move into those places where they moved dollars through those pipes that bigger advertisers didn't. Well, now everybody's using all the same pipes. And so for better or worse, you're bidding against Doritos and Coca-Cola and Chevrolet and everybody else for that eyeball. And so I think the two places that then the D2C model gets constrained, especially the subscription, is that on the one hand, you can be GMV constrained, just like how many gross merchandise dollars are even being monetized against this. And I do think that's one of the things for subscription that's harder, which is it's a more perfect competitive environment to where the companies that are going to be more winner take all that can monetize that relationship the most effectively. If they all have the same marketers and the same tech, whoever has the highest total aggregate LTV is going to win outside of variance and execution.
Yeah.
But I just think that variance and execution is a lot smaller. Like it's important to remember that Facebook didn't really have an ad engine to speak of in 2014. So in 2017 and 2018, the technical product that allowed many millions of people to give them their money systematically is only 3 or 4 years old. And now it's twice as old and twice as sophisticated. And so it's a more perfect crucible for just letting people spend their money well. And so I think to that end, if there's less variance and execution across the competitive set, the only outlying variable at that point is conversion and LTV. And the more you have to offer and the more you can monetize the relationship, the more you're going to compete for those ads. And I think that's sussing itself out a lot more efficiently now than was the case when people my age learned what it was like to be disruptive.
Some of my questions for you are like, what marketing strategies have you found most successful or effective for D2C and subscription? What were the least? What would you do again? What would you literally never do again? I'm happy to hear quick hits, but like what I'm hearing is, and this ties into a little bit, we always ask a question that's like, what's your favorite growth non-hack? Because you always hear about like, oh my God, this growth hack. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, sure, a growth hack in 2013, 2014 was figuring out how to monetize Facebook's butting ad system. You can't do that anymore. And so it's like, what are the strategies and the tactics and the things that you're just like, no, those are just going to be parts of my toolbox?
You know what? I don't mind the notion of growth hacking at all. I just think the place where you need it's different. I think the non-hack would be putting everything against a crucible of relevance, ease, and distinctiveness. And if you hadn't read the book, you should read it. It's really awesome. I don't care if you're B2B selling HVAC equipment or if you're selling fashion on Instagram. I just think it's one of the more thoughtful ways to think about consumer business. And it's a really great read. The question, though, is like, what makes it relevant and distinctive? It's a moving target that's changing really, really fast. I think you need people willing to do whatever it takes to find a way to be a little more distinctive. Find a vein that has really, really strong penetration or distinctiveness in terms of content and create a fucking ton of it fast so that you can get it in front of people and break out of that. And frankly, the biggest companies in the world are all trying to do that themselves. And so I don't know that there is any simple, slow and steady win to the race story there. You have to have some people doing that. I just think that 5-8 years ago, there was a lot of fertile ground in terms of the more quantitative system manipulation, kind of turning campaigns on and off, this kind of targeting versus that kind of. I just think it's a little bit less about the tool usage and it's more about message and content creation, doing 4 Ps of marketing with greater tenacity and greater velocity.
Yeah, that's a great place to end. I don't think we're going to top that. We could try. I could talk to you for another 3 hours. Thank you for the willingness to share and for spending so much time with me. And thanks for joining us for this episode. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you found our discussion insightful and fun. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more valuable content. And if you're excited and ready to start up-leveling your growth strategies and execution, Right Side Up has you covered. Right Side Up is a leading growth marketing agency that has partnered with over 1,000 companies of all stages and sizes to help them meet and exceed their growth goals. With expertise across all growth marketing functions, we can help you evaluate product market fit, develop customer acquisition strategies, navigate executional challenges and staffing gaps, and make pivotal decisions with confidence. And whether you need one individual or a custom-built, full-service team, we'll find you the right A+ talent. Visit us at rightsideup.com to see how we can help you and your company grow.